Hello and welcome back to the stars, everybody. Welcome back to Starfield. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Novalight Pistol. This is by far one of my favorite pistols in the entire game, and this is the very first particle weapon that you're probably going to be introduced to in Starfield. This thing kind of looks like a mix between a pistol and a thermometer or a heat gun. I actually looked for my heat gun, I couldn't find it around here. Mine doesn't look exactly like this, but it does kind of look like a tool. It does have a really cool reload animation though too, I really like this one. So let's go over the base stats and some pros and cons for the Novalight. First up, for its base stats, it kind of has an interesting split in damage because this is a particle weapon. So this one does 8 regular damage, or 8 physical damage, and then does 25 energy weapon damage. Now, this is kind of important when we're going to be going over the perks for this, because particle weapons tend to basically use every perk in the game in terms of damage, which makes them very strong. The damage it has is pretty decent. 25 damage and 8 damage is pretty good for a handgun, and this can go all the way up to an advanced version like most of the weapons in this game, so that is really awesome to see. This one uses the light particle fuse, which it's only this weapon and the star shard that actually use it, so it doesn't have very much competition, although its competition is arguably the best handgun in the game, so kind of keep that in mind. There's usually enough ammo to go around for both these, since both of them are semi-automatic, or usually semi-automatic, and don't tend to eat through the ammo super quickly. This one has a clip size of 12, so that's pretty decent. 12 rounds in a handgun is pretty good, I would say. If you get a large magazine of this, it goes up to 24, which is pretty cool. That's always nice to have, but 12 is good enough in a lot of cases. This has 22 rate of fire, so it is kind of slow, and it is actually capped at that rate of fire. Similar to something like the Urban Eagle, you can't spam fire this quicker. I kind of wish you could, but it's okay enough as it is. This one also has 30 meters of range, longer than most handguns. Most handguns are stuck at 20 meters of range, with the exception of like the Razorback being up to 40. So this is a nice middle ground between them, having longer range than most of the handguns. This has decent accuracy. It doesn't tend to bounce around too much, doesn't have a whole lot of recoil either, which is pretty cool to see. And it's kind of heavy for a handgun, I guess, at 1.35 weight. So not one of the heaviest weapons in the game, but more heavy than some of the other handguns. It's fine, it's not going to weigh you down too much. Plus, these are actually worth a decent amount of money when you do find them. So you might as well pick them up if you can. For the general pros of the Novalight, it actually has pretty good damage per second and pretty good damage per shot. Both of those are really nice, and it's also fairly accurate with its decently long range. So it's got a lot going for it just in terms of base stats. For the cons, the only real con of the Novalight compared to any other handgun is that it's fairly rare. You don't find Novalights laying around too often. Sometimes you do, sometimes you can find them in chests, sometimes you can find them in various boxes or in locked areas, but they're not one of the more common handguns. They're probably one of the more rare handguns that you are actually going to be finding. Sometimes zealots have them on them, which can be kind of useful. They tend to like their energy weapons, so sometimes these will pop up, but even then they're still not like one of the more common weapons that you're going to find. On my handgun tier list for the Novalight, I believe I put this up into A tier, and I would keep this in A tier. This is actually a really good handgun. I really like the base Novalight. It's got good damage, it's got good range, it's got fairly good reload, it doesn't fire a super common round, it doesn't eat through ammo quickly. It's also affected by basically every perk in the game, because this counts as a handgun, it counts as a ballistic weapon, counts as an energy weapon, counts as a particle weapon. So you can just throw every perk at this, and it's going to get like something from it, at least any of the more common handgun perks. So now that we went over the base Novalight, let's go over a modded version of this and where I would move this to on the tier list. And for mods, the Novalight actually doesn't have very many mods, but it's got some pretty decent ones. So for a barrel, you either have the standard barrel or a long barrel. You might as well put the long barrel on there. I would consider it just a straight upgrade to the weapon. Makes it more accurate, reduces recoil, gives you longer range. You can actually have fairly long range on this gun too, which is pretty cool. So that's kind of nice to see in a handgun. The only downside to this is like the ADS speed and the extra weight that it adds. For a laser, put on the recon laser sight if you can. If not, regular laser is fine, and if you can't do either, it's not a huge deal. This just ups your accuracy. Then for an optic, you either have the regular sights or you have a reflex sight. I put a reflex sight on mine, but the regular sights are honestly pretty good with this one too. Pick whichever one of these you would like more. Both are good. The reflex sight technically gives you a little bit more in terms of stats, but I find that optics are usually either put a scope on the weapon because it gets you more damage, or pick whichever one you like the best because it's your choice as to which one you're going to be using. Then for a muzzle, we have two options for a muzzle besides just not having anything on the muzzle. We have a focal lens, which increases your accuracy, which is kind of cool, but not really necessary with this gun. It's accurate enough. Or you can go with the focus nozzle, which gives you more headshot damage and more damage overall, as well as longer range on top of that. It looks a little bit strange, and this definitely looks more like a thermometer once you have everything on it. This does help quite a bit, and the focus nozzle is actually pretty good on this one. Then for a magazine or battery, we actually actually have quite a few different options for this weapon that make it rather interesting. I'd recommend one of two. Either go with the larger magazine or go with the Annihilator rounds. The Annihilator rounds are harder to get because they're one of the higher end additions to your weapon, so you're going to have to do a lot more research, because then they deal damage not only to the targets that you hit, but the other targets around it that deal damage to it. So Annihilator rounds are pretty cool, and like I said, since this one does count as an energy weapon, if you go with lasers, you can also potentially light something on fire. So you're diseasing them with the Annihilator rounds, you're burning them with the fire, and the particle weapons can actually just hit and linger for a while, and if enemies stay in it, they'll deal damage. So you can actually deal a decent amount of damage over time. I put Annihilator rounds in mine. Your other option is going with the EM beams, which make it so then the Novalight is non-lethal, which could be an interesting option. I didn't actually test it out because I don't really care to have non-lethal options. But if you are doing a pacifist playthrough, then this is one of the guns that you can take with that, so that's pretty cool. Then for an internal, we have two options, either overclocked or the amplifier. Overclocked gives you a higher rate of fire. That's what I picked on mine. Because the Novalight does shoot a little bit slow, this makes it so its rate of fire feels a bit better to me. Makes it so you can still have faster follow-up shots. I would really like to get a rapid version of the Novalight, because I think that would actually be really cool. Then if you don't want that and you just want more damage, amplifier is the way to go. Both are pretty good. Pick whichever one you'd like. Then for a receiver, you either can put this in semi-auto or in burst fire, which burst fire fires out 2 rounds in quick succession. It actually doesn't nerf your damage though, so if you like that, you can go with that. If not, you can go with semi-auto. I just stuck mine on semi-auto because when I did try burst fire, I thought it was just kind of okay, and I just like the semi-auto a little bit better. That one's totally personal preference. Pick whichever one you'd like. And once you have all the mods thrown onto the Novalight, I would say it goes up a tier. I would put this easily into S tier. This is one of my favorite handguns in the entire game. It just feels really satisfying to use. It's a semi-automatic handgun that has decent range, that has pretty good mods. It looks a little bit funky. I do like the reload though. Like I said, the reload actually looks pretty cool to me. I like how the slide just goes completely forward and then you reload it and it comes back and picks something up. Whatever that thing is. There is also one unique version of this that we should talk about too. That is called the Spacer. And the Spacer you can actually buy in Neon. This is bought just right out, well, I guess it's technically in Ryujin, but not in the actual building of Ryujin. It's in like their kiosk outside. You just talk to the guy there and he's selling either Novalights or the Nova Disruptors. I think those are the only 2 weapons that he can actually sell, and this one is the unique version of it. This one does have some mods on it, as well as it has a unique effect. So for the modifications, it has a laser sight, which is pretty good. A reflex sight, also pretty good. The focus nozzle, like to see that. Annihilator rounds already built into this, which is really cool. And the overclocked. This one is set up basically how I like using my Novalight, besides just putting the long barrel on it. The only downside though is actually its legendary effect. It has arguably one of the weakest legendary effects in the game, having the Space Adept. Space Adept gives you 30% more damage when you're in space, but it gives you minus 15% damage when you're on a planet. The majority of the game, the majority of your fights are going to be on a planet. The majority of exploration and really any sort of like side quest stuff is also going to be on a planet. You're not going to be fighting out in space, at least with small arms, that much. You're probably just going to be using your ship to do it. This is okay if you want to throw this into like your captain's storage, grab it whenever you're trying to board a ship or something. And there are a couple of missions where this one can come in handy. I just really wish this one didn't have the Space Adept on it though. If it had literally anything else, this thing would be like absolutely perfect. And every single New Game Plus, I would just run right to Ryujin and buy this right away. And it would stay as like my designated handgun for the longest time. I could grab this and like the Deadeye and be set for the whole game. Sadly, I usually don't, so I'm looking for more of like a rare version of this that has anything else on it. So that brings us to the end of this, and the question, should you use the Novalight Pistol? I would say yeah, Novalight Pistol is actually really good. I really enjoy it. Unless you're not using particle weapons or not using energy weapons or not using pistols, there's not really a reason to not use this. Unless, of course, you do get like a star shard that you really enjoy and you're just using that over this because the ammo is the same. Those would be about the only reasons I could think of where you might not want to be using this. This one's really cool. It was also one of my first legendary weapons that I ever got on my first run, where I got a 1-inch punch Novalight with, I think, Incinerary and something else on it. And it was ridiculously strong, and I thought like all the handguns, or all of the Novalights just work like that. I was like, oh, it's like a pistol shotgun. This thing seems really overpowered. Turns out it was just that one because I wasn't aware of what the 1-inch punch did at that time. Still, a really cool thing to get at the very start of Starfield, though. I really enjoyed it. So tell me your thoughts on the Novalight down in the comments below. How do you enjoy this handgun? What kind of way do you like to build it? And where would you put it on the tier list? I'm interested to hear that. Thank you guys so very much for watching this. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.